Drum roll, please. Today we will be dividing fractions. There are 5 different steps you have to take in order to find the quotient of a whole number and a fraction. So let's look at the 5 simple steps. Remember, if you need to, pause the video, rewatch to redo. Step number 1. In order to find the quotient of 2 fractions, we have to make the whole number a fraction. So what does that look like? My first and only example will be 3 divided by a fifth. We cannot divide a whole number by a fraction, so therefore step 1 is asking us to make that whole number a fraction. And does anyone remember how we make that whole number a fraction? Well, in order to make that whole number into a fraction, we place a denominator of 1 underneath the whole number. So therefore 3 changes into 3 over 1. And then we just simply copy down, divided by 1 over 5. Boom. Step 1, done. Step 2, keep the first fraction the same. Keep the first fraction the same. So basically what's going to happen is we're keeping the fraction the same. Therefore, I do nothing to the first fraction. So no changes yet. Let's move on. Step 3. Step 3 is now a different step, which will move on to step 4, which is a new concept or new thing you're going to have to learn for 6th grade. So step 3 is to change the division sign into a multiplication sign. So here's my original expression, 3 over 1 divided by 1 over 5. Step 3 says to change, right? So we're changing the division sign into a multiplication sign. So therefore 3 over 1 times 1 over 5. Don't solve anything yet because now we're moving on to step 4. Now step 4, your textbook doesn't introduce this word, but I will. So you'll notice it in 6th grade and in middle school. You're going to be talking about the reciprocal. So when we're finding the reciprocal of a fraction, we're basically flipping the second fraction. Again, so the textbook doesn't tell you this, but this is called the reciprocal, and you'll remember this when you're in middle school and high school. You'll be like, oh, Mr. Galicia talked about that. So yeah, the reciprocal. So what does that look like? Well, what does flipping mean? Well, here I have my expression. Now remember, we just changed that division sign into a multiplication sign. So I have 3 over 1 times 1 over 5. Now, when I say flip, I'm literally flipping the 5 and the 1. So I'm changing the position of the denominator and the numerator, which will give me, remember, the first fraction is kept the same, 3 over 1. We changed that division symbol into a multiplication symbol. And then I have 5 over 1. 5 over 1, this right here, is called the reciprocal. So that's your reciprocal. So it's basically the flipped fraction. But in math, we don't call it a flipped fraction. We call it a reciprocal. Now, you're not supposed to know that until sixth grade and probably middle school. However, I want to introduce it now. So that's your reciprocal. So again, step 4 is to flip the second fraction. So 3 over 1 times 1 over 5 will then turn into 3 over 1 times 5 over 1. And that's your reciprocal. Last but not least, step 5 is to solve. When we're solving, what I'm basically doing now, remember, our first fraction was kept the same. My reciprocal is 5 over 1. I'm basically multiplying across horizontally. So 3 times 5 is 15. 1 times 1 is 1. And I know that any fraction that has a denominator of 1 can be written as a whole number. So 15 over 1 will be 15. So I believe for today's homework, the majority of the questions that you're going to solve from the textbook, let me just check really fast, okay? I do believe that the majority of the all of them actually, all your quotients will be whole numbers. So all your quotients will be whole numbers. So make sure that you've done it correctly. If you need to go back and rewatch a step, please do so. But all of your answers for today's homework assignment should be whole numbers.